Right now, your mind may be silently reviewing the ledger of the day, checking the seams of your performance to ensure no cracks are showing. You are lying awake because you are carrying the invisible weight of a flawless exterior, polishing every memory of your actions, your words, and your productivity until your thoughts feel raw. There is a deep, hidden exhaustion that comes from living under the constant demand to be exceptional, a quiet terror that if you let your guards drop for even a single hour, you will be exposed as ordinary, or worse, as a failure. Perhaps you came here tonight because you have run out of the energy required to look unbroken, and the silence of the room is making the noise of your own self-judgment feel unbearably loud. If you feel this heaviness in your chest, please know that you are not broken, and what you are feeling right now is not a sign of failure. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent, nor will we try to engineer a perfect peace instead. We are going to explore how to stop turning the natural fluid movement of your life into an exhausting monument of perfection. The mind does not find rest because you have finally become faultless, but because you have stopped treating your rough edges as a mistake. True peace arrives when you see the surprising truth that trying to maintain a flawless self is like trying to catch rainwater on a flat, heated stone. The water may look pure for a passing second, but it evaporates quickly under the sun of anxiety, leaving behind a thick, heavy crust of mineral salt that burdens the heart. You do not have to solve your whole life tonight, dear friend, and you do not need to polish another thought. You are safe enough to soften right where you are, allowing the room to exist without your management. Let your awareness drift away from the world of doing and sink into the immediate sensory reality of your room. Notice the cool air as it settles against the window pane, a contrast to the warmth beneath your heavy linen covers. The dim contours of the walls are soft, losing their sharp boundaries in the shadows, mirroring how your own rigid definitions of success can begin to blur into the dark. If it feels right, take a slow breath in, noticing how the air feels slightly crisp at the entrance of your nostrils, and let it go without trying to change its depth or rhythm. Your body is resting heavily against the mattress, its weight supported fully by the ground beneath you, requiring no posture of competence, no display of intelligence, and no proof of worth. In this space, the darkness is not an empty void, it is a gentle curtain that conceals you from every expectation you have spent the day trying to meet. For so many years, you may have believed that your anxiety is a useful shield, that if you criticize yourself severely enough, you can prevent others from criticizing you first. We often turn our minds into relentless workshops, treating ourselves like blocks of marble that must be chipped away, carved, and smoothed until we fit an idealized image of who we are supposed to be. But this constant chipping away leaves the spirit feeling thin and brittle, living in perpetual fear of the next mistake. Tonight, let the mallet down. The world outside your door has paused its demands, and the only reality that matters right now is the rise and fall of your chest, a natural rhythm that has never once asked for your permission or your perfection to keep you alive. Take a slow breath and notice if your jaw is clamped tight or if the muscles around your eyes are still holding the strain of a vigilant day. You do not need to force anything to change, but simply notice the tension, giving it permission to exist without judging it as another flaw to correct. When we stop demanding that our bodies and minds feel a certain way, a subtle shift begins to happen within our awareness. We step off the stage of performance and become the silent, unhurried witness of the night. In a moment, this journey will show us something even quieter, taking us to a place where the need to be seen or validated completely dissolves. But before we journey there, let your thoughts wander to the very nature of a stone that sits on a mountain cliff. The stone does not look at the sky and apologize for its rough, uneven surfaces. It does not worry that the rain will expose its internal fractures or that the wind will find its shape unremarkable. It simply rests, letting the elements pass over it, completely whole within its own weathered skin. You can begin to treat your own heart with that same ancient patience tonight, knowing that the core of who you are has never needed to be polished to be sacred. As you lie here, letting the heavy rhythm of your breath deepen, let your imagination drift toward a narrow, winding path made of grey granite chips that crunch softly under bare feet. The path is cool, damp with the moisture of an early autumn night, and it leads away from the brightly lit cities of achievement up into the misty, forested folds of a quiet mountain. The air here smells deeply of wet pine needles, crushed stone and old earth, a fragrance that feels clean and entirely indifferent to human ambition. There are no signs here pointing toward progress, no clocks ticking down the minutes, and no eyes watching to see how fast you walk. There is only the pale, silver light of a hidden moon filtering through the heavy canopy, casting long, soft shadows across the ground. As you walk up this path, you notice that the frantic pacing of your daily life begins to slow down, adapting naturally to the heavy, unhurried breath of the mountain itself. Every step away from the world of demands is a step back into your own skin, a gentle return to a version of yourself that existed long before you were told you had to be extraordinary to be loved. The mist hangs low between the trees, moving like soft white smoke, swallowing the sharp edges of the landscape just as the night is swallowing the sharp edges of your worries. Further up the mountain, tucked away into a hollow of grey rock faces, sits a small, unadorned quarry where the stone is not carved into grand status symbols, but left in its elemental form. The setting is profoundly still, save for the rhythmic, distant drip of spring water falling from a mossy ledge onto a flat slab of granite below. It is here, in this atmosphere of damp stone and cool shadow, that we find a sanctuary from the relentless drive to improve. You are invited to sit down on a rough wooden bench at the edge of this quarry, wrapped in a coarse, heavy woolen robe that smells of cedar wood and wood smoke. Nothing is required of you. Here there is no test to pass, no future to secure, and no past to repair. You are simply a presence resting in the dark, listening to the heavy, ancient heartbeat of the earth. In this high sanctuary, where the scent of cedar wood mingles with the damp cold of the quarry, the mind begins to notice the small, honest movements of the night. The steady dripping of the spring water onto the granite slab below is a slow counter-rhythm to the racing thoughts you carried up the path. It is here that we encounter the footsteps of those who walked this ground long ago, carrying the exact same exhaustion that keeps you awake tonight. Many years ago, a young stonecutter named Kenji lived in the valleys beneath these peaks. He was known throughout the province for his relentless devotion to his craft, a man who could spend days without sleep, chiseling away at blocks of granite until his knuckles bleed and his eyes grew hollow with fatigue. Kenji was not driven by a simple love of stone, but by a quiet, gnawing terror that his work would never be smooth enough, that a single visible seam or rough edge would reveal him as an impostor, a craftsman unworthy of his lineage. He had built a prison out of his own high standards, believing that if he could only create a monument of absolute perfection, the persistent doubt inside his own chest would finally fall silent. One summer, the governor of the province commissioned Kenji to carve a ceremonial marker to stand at the entrance of the regional temple. For 3 months, Kenji did not leave his workshop, barely speaking to his family, refusing the food left at his doorstep, and spending his nights under the flickering glare of oil lamps. He polished the surface of the granite block with finer and finer grains of sand, rubbing the grey stone until it lost its texture entirely, turning it into a surface so unnaturally reflective that it mirrored the clouds like a sheet of ice. Yet, every morning when the sun rose, Kenji would examine the monument with a magnifying glass, finding microscopic fissures, slight shifts in coloration, or tiny invisible pits that no ordinary human eye could ever detect. Each imperfection felt like a profound betrayal of his worth, a hidden stain that threatened to ruin his entire existence. His mind became a constant storm of calculation, reviewing every hammer strike of the previous afternoon, planning how to sand down the microscopic flaws before the governor arrived. He grew thin, his chest felt perpetually tight, and his breath became shallow, short, and defensive, much like the breath you might be holding right now as you turn your own daily tasks over and over in your mind. When the monument was finally delivered, the governor praised its miraculous smoothness, calling it a masterpiece without flaw. But when Kenji returned to his dark workshop, the relief he expected to feel never arrived. Instead, he sat on the dusty floor, looking at his worn tools, feeling completely empty, broken and terrified. The praise had evaporated within an hour, leaving behind only the heavy, bitter realization that tomorrow he would have to perform this impossible feat all over again just to prove he was allowed to exist. Unable to carry the weight of his own mind any longer, Kenji took his favorite iron chisel, wrapped it in a piece of faded hemp cloth, and began to climb the steep mountain path toward the ancient quarry where the original stone splitters lived. He sought out an elderly stone splitter named Master Joran, a man who had lived alone in a small timber hut surrounded by unhewn boulders for over 40 years. When Kenji arrived at the quarry, the pre-dawn air was thick with mist, carrying the sharp scent of wet earth and cold minerals. Master Joran was sitting on a low wooden stump, holding a simple, unpolished stone plate in his calloused lap. The plate was rough, uneven and grey, clearly split from a larger boulder with minimal intervention, its edges jagged and its surface marked by deep, dark veins of iron and quartz. Kenji knelt before the elder, his hands trembling as he laid his iron chisel on the ground between them. "Master Joran," Kenji whispered, his voice cracking with the exhaustion of 100 sleepless nights. "I have spent my whole life trying to remove every flaw from the stone. I have made monuments so smooth they reflect the sky, yet inside my own heart, I feel like a crumbling ruin. The smoother I make the stone, the more fragile I become. Why is it that my pursuit of the perfect work has left me feeling so broken?" Master Joran did not answer immediately. He looked down at the unpolished stone plate in his lap, his old thumbs slowly tracing the jagged, porous perimeter of the rock. The silence between them grew wide, filled only by the heavy soughing of the mountain pine trees and the steady, cold condensation dripping from the roof of the hut. Kenji felt his chest tighten further, wondering if he had failed even in his questioning, if his anxiety was too clumsy for a master to acknowledge. Slowly, Joran picked up a small clay pitcher of fresh spring water that sat beside his feet. He did not speak a word, but began to pour the clear water directly onto the flat, unpolished stone plate. Kenji watched as the water spread across the rough surface, filling the shallow depressions, pooling in the natural cracks, and turning the dull grey mineral into a deep, glistening charcoal hue. For a moment, the wet stone captured the pale light of the morning sky, beautiful and quiet. But within a few minutes, as the mountain wind swept through the open quarry, the water began to thin. The warmth of the morning sun began to dry the surface, and the moisture rapidly evaporated into the air. As the water disappeared, it left behind a distinct, chalky white crust, a heavy residue of mineral salt that settled into the porous grooves of the stone, making the plate look even rougher, heavier, and more burdened than it had been before the water was poured. "Look closely," Master Joran said, his voice low and weathered, like the grinding of pebbles in a riverbed. "This stone plate is your heart, Kenji, and the rainwater you try so hard to collect upon its surface is the praise of the governor, the validation of the world, and the perfect image you try to maintain. You work yourself to exhaustion to ensure that your surface is flat enough to hold that liquid validation, believing that if you can hold it there, you will finally feel full." Joran touched the white, crusty salt deposit with the tip of his finger. But what happens to water when the sun rises? It leaves. It must leave, because it is the nature of external things to change and vanish. And every time the water evaporates, it leaves behind this heavy salt of anxiety, this crust of self-judgment that hardens in your pores. The more you try to hold the water of perfection, the heavier the salt becomes. You are not exhausted because you are failing, Kenji. You are exhausted because you are trying to turn a fluid life into a flawless monument that cannot breathe. Kenji looked at the salt-crusted stone plate, and for the first time in his adult life, a single tear fell down his dusty cheek, carving a clean path through the grime of his efforts. He saw his own reflection not in a polished mirror, but in the dry, burdened surface of that unhewn rock. He recognized the heavy sediment of every midnight review, every anxious rehearsal, and every harsh word he had ever spoken to himself in the dark. In a moment, this story will show us something even quieter, revealing how Kenji learned to live with the stone without the heavy weight of the salt. But notice how your own body responds to this recognition right now. You might feel a soft resonance in your own shoulders, a subtle yielding in your lower back, as you realize that the story of the stonecutter is also the story of your own midnight thoughts. You have been trying to hold onto the liquid praise of a world that cannot remain still, and the heavy crust you feel in your chest tonight is simply the residue of that impossible effort. You are allowed to let the stone dry without judging the salt. You are allowed to sit in the dark, unpolished and whole, exactly as you are. This unpolished stone plate, covered in the white crust of evaporated minerals, is a picture of what happens inside our own minds when the sun sets on our daily efforts. The tear that fell down Kenji's cheek did not come from a place of defeat. It came from the profound, sudden relief of being seen without his armor. Maybe you have felt this exact exhaustion too, lying still under your blankets while your mind continues to work in the dark, trying desperately to smooth over the rough edges of your life so that you can finally feel safe enough to rest. The story of the stonecutter is not telling us to stop caring about our lives, nor is it asking us to become cold, unfeeling, or indifferent to the things we create. It is showing us something much quieter. It is pointing toward the hidden mechanism of our own suffering, revealing that the heaviness you carry tonight is not actually caused by the work you did or the mistakes you made. The true burden comes from the way the mind holds those events after they have already passed. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that life naturally brings its own moments of difficulty, unexpected changes, and the simple, unpolished reality of being an imperfect human being in a complicated world. These are the natural conditions of our existence. But when a difficult moment arrives, our instinct is often to treat our mind like a flat, rigid monument that must hold on to that rain, turning a passing storm into a permanent pool. We tell ourselves that if we can just think about the problem long enough, if we can criticize ourselves severely enough, we can freeze the water and keep it from changing. But nothing in this world stays fixed, and the liquid validation we seek from others, the praise, the reassurance, the absolute certainty that we have done enough, will always evaporate under the warmth of shifting time. When that reassurance disappears, we are left with the heavy salt of our own internal judgment. The suffering grows not because the rain fell, but because the mind added a second, heavier wound to the first by demanding that the water never leave. One of the great insights of the Buddha was that we cannot always control the first wound, the unexpected loss, the difficult conversation, the simple fatigue of a demanding day. These things are like the rainwater falling onto the mountain rock. But the second wound is entirely created by our own resistance. It is the tight, anxious grip that says, "It must happen my way. It must look perfect, or I cannot be okay." This desperate grip turns our natural desire for safety into a constant state of fear, we become terrified of our own flaws, treating every small mistake as a sign that we are fundamentally broken. But what if your rough edges were never a mistake to begin with? What if the peace you have been searching for is not something you have to carve out of your own exhaustion, but something that is already breathing quietly beneath everything you have been trying to fix? Mindfulness, in its truest and most gentle sense, is not a technique to force your thoughts into a state of absolute silence. It is simply the capacity to notice the white crust of judgment settling on your heart without becoming it. It is the ability to stand at the edge of your own mind and watch an anxious thought drift past, realizing that you are the vast, unhewn mountain, not the tiny grain of sand that is trembling in the wind. When you see your thoughts in this way, you realize that an emotion is merely a visitor passing through your room, not a definition of who you are. Letting go does not mean you abandon your responsibilities or stop trying to live beautifully. It simply means releasing the extra, unhelpful struggle against the reality of the present moment. It means allowing the water to dry on the stone without needing to scrub away the texture that makes the stone real. When we stop adding the second wound of self-hatred to our natural tiredness, the heart begins to feel spacious. We realize that compassion is not a reward we earn after we become flawless. It is the very medicine we need when we are feeling most undone. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice if your mind is trying to analyze this teaching, turning it into another task to master or a standard to achieve. You might find yourself thinking that you must learn to let go perfectly, or that you are failing because your mind is still reviewing the day. If that pattern is happening, simply recognize it with a soft, internal smile. Even that overthinking is just more rainwater trying to find a flat place to sit. You do not need to master anything tonight. Nothing is required of you in this space except the willingness to feel the heavy, unornamented truth of your own breath. The ancient stone in the mountain quarry does not become sacred because someone polished it until it looked like glass. It is sacred because it has endured the winters, because it contains the deep veins of iron that grew in the dark earth, and because it rests fully on the ground without apologizing for its weight. Your life, too, possesses that same quiet dignity. The cracks you are trying so hard to hide are the very places where your humanity becomes visible, the porous openings through which wisdom can finally enter. In a moment, this wisdom will come closer to your own life, moving from a story about a mountain stonecutter into the very center of your physical body. We will explore a gentle way to hold your thoughts, so that the heavy sediment of the day can begin to dissolve into the mattress beneath you. But notice how much lighter the air feels when you stop demanding that this night be anything other than what it already is. You are safe enough to drop the chisel. You are allowed to be unfinished, tired, and completely whole, resting in the quiet dark that has no expectations of you. As the echo of Master Joran's words settles into the cold mountain air, let us bring this awareness back to the immediate reality of your own body. The unpolished stone plate does not require you to change its shape tonight, and neither does your own life. If it feels right, allow your attention to drop beneath the level of your thoughts and find the physical surface beneath you. Feel the steady, unyielding support of your mattress, holding your weight without asking for any justification, much like the earth beneath the mountain quarry holds the heaviest boulders without a single sigh of effort. Take a slow breath in, letting the air move fully into the lower spaces of your lungs, and as you let it go, notice if you can invite your shoulders to drop just a fraction of an inch deeper into the pillow. There is no need to force a sudden state of profound relaxation. Even noticing that you are holding tension is itself a beautiful form of gentleness. If your jaw is clenched, or if your forehead feels tight from a long day of maintaining appearances, simply acknowledge that tightness with a soft, spacious attention. Perhaps you might tell those tired muscles that their work for the day is entirely over. You do not need to stand guard over your life for the next few hours. Right now, as you lie here in the dim quiet of your room, you might notice one specific thought that has been circling your mind, asking persistently for your attention. It might be a memory of something you said that felt clumsy, a worry about a task that remains unfinished, or a general sense of anxiety about whether you are doing enough. Instead of trying to push this thought away, and instead of following it down a long path of analysis, just allow it to be seen. You might give it a soft, internal name, saying to yourself, there is the desire to be perfect, or there is the fear of failing. Naming takes away its power to command you, turning it from a monster into a simple event passing through your awareness. Now, if it feels right, imagine that you are holding that very thought gently in your hand, feeling its texture. It might feel sharp, heavy, or dry, crusted with the salt of your own long-standing expectations. Picture yourself placing this thought down onto a flat, unpolished stone plate that sits on the grass right beside your bed. You are not throwing it away in anger, you are simply setting it down outside of your body, allowing the stone to bear its weight for a while. As you place it there, let your imagination bring down a soft, cool night rain over that stone plate. Watch the clear water wash over the heavy thought, dissolving the chalky white crust of self-judgment that has built up around it. The water does not try to change the thought or force it to disappear. It simply softens its sharp, defensive edges, bathing it in a deep, absolute quiet. You can watch this process from a distance of complete safety, resting deeply under your warm covers, knowing that you do not have to fix the thought to be at peace with it. Perhaps you notice that as the crust of judgment dissolves, the thought itself begins to look different. It loses its rigid, threatening shape and becomes porous, absorbing the moisture of the night, blending naturally into the ancient grey grain of the stone plate beneath it. The mineral salt that once weighed down your heart is being washed back into the earth, where it belongs, leaving the stone clean, dark, and damp in the cool night wind. There is no urgency here, no pressure to heal your entire relationship with achievement in a single moment. Even noticing this image for a passing second is enough to create a small patch of space within your chest. Take another slow, unhurried breath, letting your abdomen rise and fall naturally without trying to match any perfect standard of meditation. If your mind wanders back into its old habit of analyzing or reviewing, there is no need to judge yourself for that. Overthinking is simply the mind's old way of trying to protect you, a habit born from a time when you believed that being flawless was the only way to stay safe. You can gently thank your mind for its vigilance, and then, whenever you are ready, return your awareness back to the heavy sensation of your body resting against the fabric of your sheets. Nothing is required of you now. You are not on a stage, you are not being evaluated, and there is no ledger keeping track of how deeply you are relaxing. You are completely anonymous in the dark, a simple human presence, breathing in a quiet room, allowed to be as unpolished, as tired, and as rough-edged as an ancient mountain boulder. The world outside your window will continue to move and change without your direction, and you can trust the night to take care of itself while you rest. In a moment, this journey will take us further up the mountain path, past the quarry, to an old bamboo grove, where the lesson of the stonecutter deepens into a different kind of transformation. But for now, let yourself linger in this state of uncomplicated being. You have dropped the heavy mallet of self-criticism, and the chisel is resting silently on the ground. Your worth is not a monument that must be carved out of your own exhaustion. It is the quiet, unbreakable ground that has been supporting your weight all along. Allow yourself to sink into that ground, feeling steadier, softer, and more spacious with every slow release of your breath. The stillness of the mountain quarry stays with us as we follow the winding grey path even higher. into a part of the forest where the granite cliffs give way to a dense, overgrown grove of ancient bamboo. The stalks rise like green pillars into the night mist, their narrow leaves rustling against one another, with a sound that resembles the steady, rhythmic falling of a gentle summer rain. It was into this quiet green world that Kenji traveled after his time with the stone splitter, carrying the lesson of the unpolished stone plate deep within his heart, yet still struggling with the ancient habits of his own mind. For though he understood that his worth could not be carved into a flawless monument, his hands still trembled with the deeply ingrained urge to control every outcome, to fix every irregularity, and to treat every unexpected turn as a personal failure. Master Joran had sent him to this valley to assist an elderly nun named Sister Sora, who tended to a small, isolated hermitage hidden deep within the bamboo. Sister Sora was a woman of immense quietude, her face lined with the deep grooves of many winters, her movements deliberate and slow, as if she were moving through water rather than air. When Kenji arrived, she did not give him a grand teaching or demand an accounting of his spiritual progress. She simply handed him an old, unglazed clay vessel and asked him to perform a single, ordinary task. Every morning before the sun broke through the canopy, he was to walk down to the mountain spring, fill the jar to its brim, and bring the water back to the hermitage kitchen for the morning tea. The vessel she gave him was rough, heavy, and completely unadorned. It had been shaped from the coarse red clay of the lower valleys, fire-baked in a simple kiln, and left unfinished. When Kenji first took it into his hands, his craftsman's eye immediately noticed its imperfections. The rim was slightly uneven, the clay was porous, and near the bottom, running along the curve of the base, were several hairline fractures, tiny, narrow cracks where the clay had contracted too quickly in the heat of the fire. On his first morning, Kenji walked down the misty path to the natural spring. The air was cold, the wet earth sticking to his bare soles as he knelt by the pool of crystal-clear water. He submersed the heavy jar, watching the water rush over the rough clay rim, filling it until the surface was a perfect, tense mirror reflecting the overhanging bamboo leaves. Lifting the heavy vessel, Kenji set off back up the path toward the hermitage. Instantly, his old anxiety returned to claim him. He noticed that the water was weeping through the hairline cracks at the base, dark drops falling steadily into the dust at his feet. Terrified of failing his simple task, Kenji stiffened his posture. He locked his elbows, tightened his grip until his knuckles turned white, and slowed his stride to a painful, microscopic crawl. He monitored the surface of the water with hyper-vigilant eyes, trying to balance his weight so perfectly that not a single drop would spill over the rim, while simultaneously stressing over the water that was quietly escaping from the bottom. Every drop that fell felt like a direct indictment of his capability, a silent declaration that he was incompetent, clumsy, and unable to perform even the simplest service for the temple. By the time he reached the kitchen, his shoulders were aching with intense strain, his breath was shallow and ragged, and his mind was completely exhausted from the effort of the walk. When he poured the water into Sister Sora's copper kettle, he saw to his absolute horror that the vessel was barely half full. The cracks had done their work, leaving a trail of moisture across the forest path and leaving Kenji with a familiar, bitter taste of failure in his throat. For 3 weeks, this pattern repeated itself every single morning. No matter how carefully Kenji walked, no matter how much he braced his body against the weight, or how intensely he focused his mind, the vessel always arrived half empty. He began to dread the dawn. He found himself lying awake in his small sleeping mat at night, replaying the steps of the path, calculating how he might walk faster without disturbing the water, or how he might hold the clay base to seal the leaks with his bare skin. He was rehearsing the walk before it even happened, turning a simple walk through the forest into a desperate struggle against his own perceived inadequacy. One morning, after arriving at the kitchen with a jar that was emptier than usual, Kenji could no longer contain the pressure built up inside his chest. He set the rough clay vessel down on the wooden table with a heavy thud, fell to his knees before Sister Sora, and bowed his head until it touched the cold floor. "Sister Sora," he said, his voice heavy with shame and frustration, "I must ask you to give this task to someone else, or give me a vessel that is whole. I am bringing you nothing but failure. Every day I try with all my strength to walk perfectly, to keep the water still, to protect it from leaking. But this jar is broken at its core, and no matter my effort, I cannot change its nature. I am only wasting the mountain water, and I am only proving that I am unfit to be here." Sister Sora did not scold him, nor did she rush to comfort him with empty words. She slowly poured the remaining water into her kettle, set it over the small charcoal fire, and looked down at the weeping clay jar. But the deeper lesson had not yet revealed itself. She stood up, her coarse cotton robes rustling softly in the quiet kitchen, and looked at the young man. "Kenji," she said gently, "tomorrow morning when you fill the vessel, I do not want you to look at the water inside the rim. I do not want you to tighten your arms or try to balance the weight to save every drop. Tomorrow, I ask only one thing of you. Keep your eyes on the ground along the right side of the path as you walk back up the hill." Kenji was confused by her request, but his exhaustion had broken his resistance. The following morning, he walked down to the spring with the same heavy, porous jar. He dipped it into the cool water, lifted it to his hip, and began the ascent. But instead of locking his jaw and staring intensely into the jar, he remembered Sister Sora's instruction. He allowed his stride to assume its natural, unhurried rhythm, letting his arms loosen and his breath flow deeply into his abdomen. Even as he felt the cold, rhythmic drip of the leaking water splashing against his right ankle, he turned his gaze downward, watching the right edge of the dirt path. What he saw made his footsteps slow down, not out of anxiety, but out of absolute wonder. On the left side of the path, where nothing ever spilled, the ground was dry, hard, and barren, nothing but packed grey earth and withered roots. But on the right side of the path, along the exact line where the cracked clay vessel had been weeping its water every morning for 3 weeks, the landscape had completely transformed. A vibrant, lush ribbon of emerald green moss had cushioned the stones. Tiny, delicate wild ferns were unfurling their pale fronds from the damp soil, and hundreds of small, blue phosphorest flowers had opened their petals to meet the morning light, nourished entirely by the water that Kenji thought he was wasting. He stopped in the middle of the grove, the heavy clay jar resting easily against his hip. For the first time, he did not see the leaking water as a loss, nor did he see the hairline cracks as a fatal flaw. He stood in the quiet morning mist, listening to the wind pass through the high bamboo, watching the water drop from the base of the jar directly onto the thirsty roots of a wild flower. When he returned to the kitchen, he set the half-empty jar down, but his chest did not feel tight and his shoulders were completely dropped. Sister Sora looked at him and smiled. "You see, Kenji," she said softly, "you were so consumed by the idea of a perfect delivery that you never noticed what your cracks were doing for the forest. You thought you were failing, because you could not hold the water in a rigid container. But the earth did not need a perfect container. It needed the moisture that escaped through your broken places." Kenji did not instantly become a perfect master of his mind that morning. His habits did not vanish in a single flash of light, but a subtle, real transformation had occurred within his spirit. The next day, when he went to the spring, he still carried the same cracked clay pot. He still arrived at the kitchen with only half the water. But he no longer hated the jar, and he no longer hated himself for the leak. He had stopped treating his unfinished nature as a disaster, realizing that the beauty of the path was only possible because he was unable to hold everything perfectly inside. The emerald ribbon of moss and the fragile forest flowers that bloomed along Kenji's path did not appear because his clay vessel was suddenly healed. The true transformation occurred because he stopped treating the water that escaped as a sign of his own unworthiness. He allowed the vessel to leak, and in doing so, he stepped out of a life of perpetual defense and into a life of quiet connection. When we sit with this image in the stillness of the night, it invites us to examine the intricate architecture of our own internal exhaustion. We begin to look beneath the surface of our overthinking to see the hidden machinery that keeps our minds running, even when our bodies are desperate for rest. Have you ever wondered why your mind is so reluctant to let go of its heavy monitoring? Why it feels so dangerous to simply lie in the dark without reviewing the day or planning for tomorrow? For many of us, this constant mental activity is not an accident. It is a deeply ingrained strategy of control. We treat our thoughts like a protective shield, falsely believing that if we can foresee every mistake, rehearse every conversation, and criticize our own performance severely enough, we can prevent the world from hurting us. We use self-judgment as a crude tool for self-improvement, operating under the silent, mistaken assumption that if we shame ourselves for being imperfect, we will eventually manufacture a version of ourselves that is completely safe from rejection. This is the exhausting cycle of seeking approval, a pattern that transforms our daily lives into a constant performance and our beds into a courtroom. We spend our days trying to present a polished monument to the world, and then we spend our nights scrubbing the stone in the dark, terrified of the white crust of salt that our anxiety leaves behind. We become caught in a deep resistance to the reality of who we are, fighting against the natural, porous, and unfinished qualities of our human nature. We treat our fatigue as a flaw, our uncertainty as a failure of intelligence, and our emotional wounds as proof that we are fundamentally broken. Buddhist wisdom cuts through this internal conflict with a beautiful and liberating distinction. It teaches us that in every human life, there are always two distinct types of pain. The first pain is simply what life brings to our doorstep, the natural conditions of being alive in a fragile physical form. This first pain includes the structural limitations of our bodies, the unexpected changes in our circumstances, the natural grief of loss, and the simple, honest tiredness that follows a day of effort. This is like the hairline fractures at the base of Kenji's clay pot, or the rain that falls naturally upon the mountain stone. We cannot always control this first pain. We cannot engineer a life where the wind never blows, where the clay never cracks, or where we never experience a moment of clumsiness. But the true source of our deep midnight exhaustion is almost always the second pain. The second pain is entirely what the mind adds to the original experience, through resistance and judgment. The first pain is feeling tired. The second pain is the harsh inner voice that says you are lazy and behind because you need rest. The first pain is a misunderstanding with someone you care about. The second pain is the hours of frantic midnight rehearsal where you replay the argument, trying to prove your innocence or carving a flawless defense in your mind. The first pain is a crack in the vessel. The second pain is the heavy sediment of shame that accumulates when you decide that because you are cracked, you are entirely unlovable. We cannot always stop the first pain from falling like rain upon our lives, but we can learn to stop feeding the second. We can stop turning a passing drop of water into a permanent crust of salt. Peace, within this ancient lineage of wisdom, is never described as the absolute absence of difficulty, nor is it a magical state where your life becomes perfectly organized and free of problems. True peace is simply a completely different relationship with your difficulties. It is the capacity to feel the crack in your container without deciding that you are a failed craftsman. It is the willingness to let the water leak without treating the dryness of the path as a disaster. Slowly, this teaching becomes personal as we look at how you might be holding your own mind tonight. Perhaps you have been carrying your pain for so long that you have inadvertently built an entire identity around it. When we spend years trying to be the one who never fails, the one who remains unbroken, or the one who manages everything perfectly, we begin to mistake our protective armor for our actual skin. We become terrified of letting the armor drop because we do not know who we would be without the struggle. We fear that if we stop polishing the stone, we will simply disappear into an ordinary, unmarked existence that no one will remember. But notice what happens to your breathing when you realize that you do not have to turn your life into a permanent monument to be worthy of occupying space on this earth. The mountain does not demand that its rocks be transparent like glass. It allows them to be dark, heavy and moss-covered, resting deeply in the soil without any need to justify their position. Your overthinking is often just fear pretending to protect you, a frantic attempt to build a flat surface where the changing waters of life can be held still. But the heart cannot find rest in a state of rigid preservation. It finds rest when it becomes like the open quarry, spacious enough to let the rain fall, let the sun shine, and let the water evaporate naturally without keeping an account of the loss. You do not need to fix yourself through shame tonight, dear friend. Shame is a heavy, blunt instrument that only hardens the clay and makes the spirit more brittle. What you need is not a sharper chisel to cut away your imperfections, but a softer space to hold them. When you stop treating your thoughts as absolute truths and begin to see them as simple weather patterns passing over the mountain, the tight grip in your chest can finally begin to yield. You can notice the internal critic without obeying its commands. You can feel the heavy sediment of the day's worries settling onto the stone plate beside you, letting the cool night air wash over it without needing to solve a single problem before your eyes close. In a moment, we will explore how this deep internal shift changes the way you walk through your ordinary tomorrow, bringing this soft perspective down from the mountain peaks into the small, practical moments of your daily routine. But before we journey there, let your awareness rest fully in the absolute lack of demand that surrounds you right now. You are not required to be strong, you are not required to be wise, and you do not have to achieve a perfect state of meditation to be allowed to rest. The dark room is entirely indifferent to your achievements, and the mattress beneath you requires no proof of your value to hold you safe against the earth. You are allowed to be porous, unfinished, and completely resting in the quiet dark. Now let this ancient mountain wisdom come all the way down from the misty peaks and the bamboo groves directly into the concrete, unvarnished texture of your everyday life. The struggles of the stonecutter Kenji are not confined to old parables or distant centuries. They are alive right now, repeating themselves in the small, modern spaces where you work, communicate, and try to survive. You live in a world that operates like a relentless market of polished surfaces, a digital landscape that constantly demands you display an unblemished monument of your success, your happiness, and your absolute competence. Every screen you touch invites you to compare your internal complicated mess with the curated, flawless exteriors of others, fueling that quiet, midnight panic that you are somehow falling behind, that you are not enough, or that your container is dangerously cracked. Think of how this pattern plays out in the ordinary moments of your day, perhaps in the simple act of staring at your phone, waiting for a specific text message or notification to arrive. In those long, anxious minutes of waiting, your mind treats that digital response exactly the way Kenji treated the rainwater on the hot stone plate. You seek that message as a form of liquid validation, believing that if it finally arrives, it will fill your emptiness and prove that you are valued, seen, and secure. But if the message is delayed, or if it arrives cold and brief, the water evaporates instantly, and you are left lying in the dark, with the heavy, scratchy mineral salt of self-doubt hardening in your chest. The suffering is not in the phone itself, nor is it in the silence of the other person. It is in the desperate way your mind grips the notification, turning a simple piece of communication into a verdict on your entire worth. Maybe you have felt this heavy friction during your working hours, perhaps sitting at a desk or standing in a meeting, forcing a calm smile onto your face while your heart feels hollow and exhausted. You perform your duties with meticulous care, checking every email 3 times to ensure no error is visible, terrified that a single misplaced word will expose you as a failure. You carry an invisible ledger in your head, constantly calculating your performance, trying to plug every leak in your productivity, because you have been conditioned to believe that your right to exist is directly tied to how much water you can successfully carry without spilling. When you finally step away from the noise to rest at night, a subtle guilt follows you into the bedroom, whispering that you have not earned this stillness, that you are being lazy, and that you should be doing more to fix your life. Now let this wisdom come closer to your own life, down into the very texture of your tomorrow, showing us how the path begins to soften when we change our relationship with these daily storms. Peace is not something you must cultivate in a quiet temple after years of isolated meditation. It is practiced in the tiny, unnoticed gaps of a stressful afternoon. True wisdom is the single deep breath you take before you reply to an email that has made your chest tighten with defensiveness. In that brief moment of breathing, you are choosing to stop treating your immediate internal reaction as an absolute command that must be obeyed. You are allowing the anxious thought to exist without turning it into your identity. You can begin to walk through your daily routine with the realization that not every thought that crosses your mind deserves your obedience, and not every heavy feeling is a truth. When the old habit of overthinking arises, when your mind begins to stage future catastrophes or replay past mistakes like an endless loop of a bad film, you can learn to look at those thoughts with the same patient detachment Sister Sora showed toward the leaking clay vessel. You do not need to fight the thoughts. You do not need to scream at your mind to be silent, and you do not need to shame yourself for feeling anxious. Even noticing the pattern is enough. You can simply say to yourself, my mind is trying to polish the stone again, and then gently guide your awareness back to the physical reality of the present moment. This shift allows you to care deeply about your life, your work, and your relationships without gripping them so tightly that you crush the spirit within them. You can show up for your responsibilities with full sincerity, yet understand that you can act without forcing the ultimate outcome to match your exact desires. When you let go of the impossible demand for absolute perfection, your work loses its rigid, defensive quality and becomes creative, spacious, and fluid. You stop treating every small mistake as a fatal crack in your character, realizing that a mistake is simply a piece of water dropping into the dust, an event that can teach you something new if you are willing to look at the ground rather than the empty rim. Think of how much lighter your tomorrows could feel if you allowed yourself to rest without needing to earn it first. Rest is not a reward you receive after you have successfully completed every task and pleased every person in your life. Rest is the very ground that allows you to live at all. It is a form of deep spiritual discipline to lie down at the end of the day and say to your frantic mind, the ledger is closed. For tonight the stone remains unpolished, the jar is half empty, and that is entirely enough. You can forgive yourself for the things you did not achieve today, recognizing that your life cannot be managed like a perfect corporate spreadsheet. Tomorrow, when you find yourself caught in the old trap of comparison, When you feel that painful sting of believing that everyone else is moving ahead while you are remaining stagnant, take a slow, unhurried breath. Remember that the timeline of your life does not have to match the artificial clocks of the world around you. Like the unhewn stone in the mountain quarry, your value does not change because someone failed to notice your texture. Like the rough clay vessel carrying water through the bamboo grove, your apparent flaws might be the very channels through which grace, empathy, and deep human connection are flowing into an otherwise dry and rigid world. You can choose to stop hiding your cracks from the people you love. When we spend our lives pretending to be completely unbroken, we inadvertently create a wall of glass around our hearts, making it impossible for anyone to truly touch us or offer genuine comfort. True intimacy begins when we drop the monument of perfection and allow our loved ones to see the porous, weathered, and honest details of our true nature. When you accept your own unfinished edges, you naturally create a soft, non-judgmental space for others to drop their armor as well, allowing a deep, mutual forgiveness to heal the relationships that have been strained by unrealistic expectations. Tonight, as you lie here with these thoughts, let the modern world with all its frantic demands recede into the distance, losing its power over your body. The phone can remain dark, the unread messages can wait in the digital cloud, and the plans for tomorrow can sit undisturbed on the table outside your room. You do not have to solve your whole life before your eyes close, and you do not need to perfect a single part of your history tonight. You are allowed to be an unpolished presence in a completely quiet room, letting your breath carry away the last residues of the day's mineral salt, drifting slowly toward a deeper state of release, where the need to perform completely dissolves. The room has grown completely still now, wrapped in the deep, unhurried shadows of the late midnight hour, the frantic currents of the day, the endless lists of things you wanted to smooth over, and the heavy ledger of your accomplishments have all faded into the background. There is nothing left for you to perform, no exterior image you need to protect, and no expectation left to fulfill. The dark space around you has completely unburdened you of your name, your duties, and your history, leaving only the soft, elemental presence of your physical form resting against the fabric of your bed. Listen closely to the quiet cadence of your own breathing. The breath is arriving and departing without any conscious management from your mind, flowing through you with the exact same effortless wisdom that directs the wind through the high bamboo canopy. You do not have to engineer a perfect breath, just as you do not have to engineer a perfect life. With every slow release of air, let your jaw soften completely, allowing the tiny muscles around your eyes to unclamp, and feel the heavy warmth of relaxation settling into the base of your neck. Your body is growing heavier with every passing moment, sinking down into the mattress like a weathered granite block settling into the deep, wet moss of a silent forest floor. Let your imagination return one last time to that high mountain sanctuary where the unpolished stone plate sits under the open sky. The night rain has stopped, leaving the surface of the rock dark, wet, and cool. The pale silver light of the midnight sky rests upon its uneven ridges, illuminating its veins of iron and quartz without demanding that they change their positions. Any remaining crust of mineral salt, any lingering sediment of old self-judgment, is being quietly dissolved by the moisture, trickling down the rough sides of the stone and returning harmlessly into the black soil below. The stone plate does not need to hold the sky or capture the rain, it simply exists, fully supported by the ancient earth, porous, rough-edged, and completely at peace with its own unhewn nature. Beside it, inside the dark timber kitchen of the hermitage, the rough clay vessel sits quietly on the wooden table. Its work for the day is entirely finished. The remaining water has leaked completely through the hairline cracks at its base, leaving the jar empty, dark, and cool. There is no shame in its emptiness, and there is no failure in its design. The water it lost along the path is already doing its hidden work in the dark, soaking into the roots of the wild ferns and feeding the soft emerald moss that blankets the stones. The vessel does not need to be whole to be sacred. Its very brokenness has become a source of hidden life for the forest. You can let your own heart sit empty and unfinished tonight, trusting that the parts of yourself you thought were failing have already contributed to the hidden beauty of the world in ways you cannot see. You can give yourself permission to stop solving your life for tonight. The problems that seemed so urgent a few hours ago are merely thoughts, temporary ripples on the surface of a deep, silent ocean. You do not have to fix your past, you do not have to secure your future, and you do not have to prove your worth to a single soul before your eyes close. The world outside your window is resting in its own unpolished skin, and you are allowed to do the same. Let your awareness dissolve past all definitions of success or failure, stepping off the relentless wheel of doing and sinking into the vast, uncomplicated space of simple being. Your chest rises and falls, a slow, rhythmic tide that carries you deeper and deeper into the quiet dark. The weight of your bones feels comforting now, a heavy, solid reassurance that you are anchored safely to the ground. You are not a monument that must be carved out of your own exhaustion. You are the vast, unshakable mountain itself, entirely undisturbed by the passing weather of your thoughts. The internal judge has laid down the mallet. The internal craftsman has dropped the chisel, and the mind has finally stopped its endless sanding of the soul. As you drift closer to the edge of a deep, unburdened slumber, feel the profound physical relief of an open hand on the mattress. You are letting go of the liquid validation you tried so hard to collect, allowing your spirit to become empty, spacious, and completely whole within its own weathered form. The darkness is a soft, heavy blanket that enfolds you, whispering that you are safe enough to disappear into the anonymous quiet of the night, where no one is watching, no one is evaluating, and nothing is required. The deep roots of the ancient trees sit undisturbed in the black, cool earth below, entirely unseen, unpraised, and perfectly at peace in the dark. Your heart can rest in that ancient soil tonight, knowing that its value was never something to be earned. Let the rhythm of the wind through the bamboo soothe the remaining corners of your mind, guiding you down into a heavy, dreamless sleep where every definition of who you are supposed to be completely melts away. What if the home you have been searching for all these years was never a destination you had to reach, but simply the quiet awareness that remains when you finally stop trying to fix yourself?